What's up, anime fans, and welcome back to What's the Difference? The Shaman King Edition, a series where I compare and contrast the various different adaptations of a given media. You'd think I'd get it down by this point, but as with Shaman King, I'm comparing the manga to its adaptations, the 2001 anime and the 2021 anime. As of right now, the two anime have taken two completely different paths. The original having gone into a more proactive direction, as we've seen Hao actively decide to forego the shaman fight and just go for the Great Spirit on his own. Whereas in the original manga, as well as the newer anime, Hao has, for the most part, been staying in line with the rules of the shaman fight. But that's about to change. But before we get to that, we are seeing Mikihisa's training of Team Ren, trying to get them on the same level as Yo and the others. However, there's still a bit of a difference, as with the original anime, the entirety of Yo and his friends are about on the same level, and Mikihisa has tried to train them as a collective, whereas in the manga and newer anime, it was simply Ren and his team who were kind of lacking behind. But in every version, it is Ren's stubbornness that is keeping him from actually accepting the teachings of Yo's dad, Mikihisa Asakura. So let's see what differences we observe as Mikihisa continues to try to beat some sense into Ren, and the machinations of how Asakura start to fully come into play. Now, with the original anime, we see a little bit more of Mikihisa just styling over Ren in every conceivable way, trying to get him to accept his limitations. And in all versions, we finally get to a point where Ren actually manages to connect a hit on Mikihisa, with Ren not willing to give up whatsoever, even in the face of adversity. Whereas in the original anime, Mikihisa just calls it a day there, and that's about the end of it. And Ren just kind of has to take some of his tutelage to heart on his own. In the manga and newer anime, Ren is far more stubborn, with the hit he delivered to Mikihisa doing at least a little bit of damage. Ooh, also, I forgot to say, we're currently in volume 17 of the manga, chapter 148, Barbeque Party, episode 53 of the original anime, Bye Bye, and episode 27 of the newer anime, Farewell Forever. And it's kind of funny, having Ren kind of accept Mikihisa's teachings kind of begrudgingly in the original anime shows a kind of almost interesting maturity to Ren, though he was still wanting to go after Mikihisa, not wanting to back down. But I also feel as though that kind of dulls his edge just a little bit. Whereas with the manga and newer anime, Ren starts to gloat about everything that's happened, but he also has an understanding of what Mikihisa has been trying to get him to do. And that continues on with the insight that Ren continues to display over the course of the manga and newer anime. And that's something I always kind of appreciate. The original anime had a tendency to make Ren insightful in the beginning, but then kind of over time made him a little bit more stubborn towards the end of the series, almost like he was regressing in his character. Whereas with the manga and newer anime, Ren and Yo are only so close. And Ren's edge has never really been dulled. It's just more like it's been slowly being more and more tempered over time. But he's never lost that kind of volatile nature for the most part. It's still there, even as Ren improves and becomes a better person. Even saying that, he won't be taught, he'll take the lesson from Mikihisa. And it's only when Ren is basically flat on his back, pretty much knocked out, that he just has to accept the reality that is before him. Also, I have to say that I love the fact that Chocolove and Horohoro just kind of are going along with the flow of Mikihisa at this point. And Mikihisa has gone on to just kind of take more of a almost kinder role towards the boys. Although he was almost doing that from the beginning. Mikihisa really does have big dad energy in the manga and newer anime. Not to say that he doesn't have that in the original anime, he does. In fact, his initial training really did kind of show that off. It's just this nice moment of him trying to feed the boys, especially Ren. I don't know, it does a little something more for me. And also the fact that he defeated Tao En, but he also goes on to say that Tao En kind of defeated himself. He just had such an overabundance of Foryoku that almost came spilling out of him. And I also love the fact that Ren actually kind of comes to this question to Mikihisa. And it's something that we kind of scratched the surface of in the original anime. And I can't tell if it really ever came up. But Ren questions why more powerful adults, with the skills of Mikihisa and the like, would entrust the fate of the world to children. And Mikihisa gives an interesting answer that, your mileage may vary with, and that's that adults have found their ceiling. They have a tendency to kind of see their limitations after a certain point, especially as they grow older, and they feel it closing in on them more and more. But young children, they have the tendency to think that they're limitless, invincible. They feel that they can just continue to grow, and because of that, they can. They have almost this infinite well of growth to a certain degree. Now, like I said in my reaction to this episode 27, that's not always the case. Sometimes it can be vice versa. But that's why younger people have such a tendency to excel. And, once you kind of hit your 30s or so, it's less expected that you'll be as capable as you could be if you were like in your 20s, teens, and so on and so forth. Hell, that's why it tends to be that younger generations are always a bit smarter than older generations in a lot of situations, because they have the older generation to learn from, to not make as many mistakes from the older generation. But that's kind of a two-way street of, is the older generation willing to teach the younger generation in a way that doesn't demean the younger generation? And is the younger generation willing to learn from the older generation and kind of put aside their youthful pride? Mikihisa goes on to say that Ren knows that he has kind of hit his limitations. Well, he knows his own weaknesses, but he has a tendency to keep trying, to keep pushing forward no matter what. He doesn't accept his limitations. He'll keep trying until he dies, basically. Try until it kills you. That's why he says he will not waver in his convictions. It's actually pretty interesting. And it's even revealed that Ren did actually start to figure out Mikihisa's techniques as they were fighting. Though it shows that Ren does have a lot of potential behind him. Even in defeat, he was able to learn something. And so, of course, Chocolove and Horohoro want to get in on some of that. And Mikihisa's just like, the best way to teach you is through actual combat. You will learn as we go. However, their training is interrupted as I love how Ren puts it, their hobo barbecue has attracted some visitors, namely Nikrom and Magna. Also, for some reason, they leave out Nikrom saying he doesn't eat meat. It's just like, that's a nice little bit of characterization. And again, whereas it's Nikrom and Zinc in the original anime, it was Magna in the manga and newer anime who were serving underneath Hao, despite the fact that they're Patch. And whereas Nikrom and Zinc in the original anime were going out of their way to help guide Hao to the Great Spirit, here, you have Magna and Zinc actually seeking out souls to feed to the Spirit of Fire. We also see something that is kind of foreign to a certain degree to the original anime, and that's the teammates of Mikihisa for the shaman fight. And that mostly comes from the fact that they weren't able to be involved. Not a lot of plot points were known about them at the time of the original anime coming to its end, and to try to just shove them in or shoehorn them in, it would have been a little too late. And that's why you had the character of Fudo introduced as a way of giving Mikihisa someone to interact with. Now, we've entered into chapter 149, Death Clash, which sounds like a metal album, as Anna and Yo are about to receive a visit from none other than Silva, who's got urgent news for them, as it's revealed that Mikihisa is a participant in the shaman fight under the name of Miki Asakura, as he's entered the shaman fight in order to try to defeat Hao, and is even willing to take on the patch to do so. However, that's not really what Magna and Nikrom are after in this situation, as we see the re-arrival of Peyote come to attack everyone. Meanwhile, in episode 59 of the original anime, Holy Ground of the Stars, Hao is continuing his pursuit of the Great Spirit, as honestly the original anime is starting to kind of wind down in terms of its manga content and its plot overall, as it starts to seem like the Great Spirit is kind of paying favor to Hao, as he calls his followers to his side as Yo's friends pursue them. However, there's no telling where everyone ends up, as everyone pretty much ends up separated going forward. And I do like this moment of reconciliation between Morphine and Lyserg, which is kind of long overdue. And Lyserg has kind of taken a more nicer personality by this point. A lot of his more bitter tendencies have almost kind of washed away, and now he's a little bit more in line with his manga counterpart for the most part, as he's basically accepted friendship over revenge by this point, and he's even given a new pendulum by Iron Maiden Jean to replace his old one. Although I prefer him keeping his other one, since that came from his parents, his father. Although, if I were to find out that this was kind of a repaint of that one, I'd be fine with that too. And everyone ends up in this kind of mysterious in-between place, and they end up being ambushed here and there. Specifically, Ren coming under attack by two followers of Hao. But Ren is willing to throw down here and now. And Ren really holds his own against the two of them. And then Ren ends up getting some help from Ryu, and it becomes a 2-on-2 battle. Meanwhile, Yo is also lost, as he ends up meeting up with Silva and Kalem. And it's an interesting way of getting the patch involved, with how completely disregarding the shaman fight. And then they're confronted by Nikrom and Zinc, who are now out-and-out traitors, which is funny because in the original it was Nikrom and Magna who considered Silva a traitor, because they saw Hao as the undisputed victor of the shaman fight. And the funny thing about Nikrom in both versions, they're basically trying to play mind games with our heroes in certain ways. Meanwhile, Manta ends up coming into contact with none other than Hao of all people. And Hao's taken an interest in Manta because, despite being a human, he seems almost above ordinary, and Hao kind of treats Manta's presence as a weird twist of fate. And I like Yo finding out that Silva is also a descendant of Hao. He kind of takes that as him and Silva being basically relatives for the most part. It's a weird moment of bonding, and we get a little bit of the backstory. It's interesting because despite the fact that Hao had a wife and child, even after he did what he did, destroying villages and stealing the spirit of fire, one of his descendants was still allowed to be one of the 10 priests. His wife and child weren't punished or anything like that. It's actually pretty nice, because in a lot of situations they would have been punished in most tellings of this kind of a story, but there was no ill will whatsoever, at least displayed for the most part. And whereas it's seen more of a mercy in the original anime, the patch are a little bit more of on the shady side in the manga. Which, I mean, considering some of the things the patch pull, you can kind of understand that. And Yo is allowed to go on ahead because, well, he's the other half of How, basically. And of course, we get Necrom and Zinc throwing down with Calum and Silva. Zinc a punk, though. He's just a knockoff Silva. Like, that's the sad part. All he is a palette swap. I also love that Manta is defiantly following How. Meanwhile, in the manga and newer anime, with the arrival of Peyote, he's determined to kill all of Yo's friends and feed them to the Spirit of Fire. It's also revealed that Mikihisa Asakura's teammates are being attacked. Well, set to be devoured by the Spirit of Fire, which, Mickey's just kind of like, you would kill innocent children? And Magnus just like, they're not innocent. They're shaman fight participants. And powerful shamans who will be fed to the Spirit of Fire. And this is basically used as a way of incurring the wrath of Mikihisa, but Ren tells him, hey, no, ignore these guys. They're trying to get your gusto up. You go worry about your teammates, and I'll deal with them here and now. It's some nice little bit of confidence as shown by Ren. And so Mikihisa ultimately leaves it up to Ren, and Magna decides to head off too, to make sure the job is done, leaving it to Necrom. Meanwhile, we see the team that has been sent after the two young children, which is Team Flowers, or Hanagumi, and they just go in on the attack. Not even anything to really say. Just give us your souls, kids. Is actually pretty brutal. Like, no sympathy whatsoever. Meanwhile, in the original anime, the encounter with Team Flowers happens in episode 39. And as a bit of a substitute for Mikihisa's team, it's Yo's team for the most part. And it's back when they were still traveling through America. Yeah, Team Flowers just kind of rolls in, still on the mission from How to defeat and kill as many of Yo's friends as possible. And they have just as much apathy for Yo's team as they do for Mikihisa's team. And this all happened before Yo and his friends had any of How's teachings. So, this was them at a weaker state, and they're basically there to kind of bring some strength out of Yo. Show him how weak he is so that he'll want to train harder. And everyone goes in on the attack, and Team Flowers is completely unscathed. Like, they are really shown to be powerful in all of this. Meanwhile, this was also at a time when Anna was trying to make her way to Yo to give them How's teachings from the book. And it becomes a bit of a desperate struggle as the girls are seen to be just too strong. And even with all of Yo's friends working in tandem, they just can't seem to make any leeway against these three girls. Honestly, it comes off almost kind of embarrassing just how incapable everyone is on getting a hit on these girls. Yeah, the way they manhandle Yo and his friends is absolutely terrifying. And then the patch just talking about how it's the will of the Great Spirit and Silva can't accept that. Honestly, in terms of Silva's characterization, it always kind of felt weird that Silva ultimately didn't go against the patch towards the end of the anime, because that's what the story had really been leading up to. But How's deciding to just go after the Great Spirit completely derails that plot line. Whereas with the manga and newer anime, it's very much moving forward with that direction of Silva ultimately going more and more against the patch. And it's not as though the original anime underplayed that. It really, if nothing else, it compounded on that feeling of Silva getting more and more fed up with the patch. And it's only because Anna steps in that they're saved basically. And it's only because of that that Team Flowers retreats. Because Hao said not to get involved with her. Because she has something important for Yo. It's basically a way of moving Yo towards actually accepting the book with its teachings in it. Meanwhile, in the manga and newer anime, it's a combined effort that saves the children, with Jun, Tamao, and Anna all coming in to save them, having been put up to it by Silva. Meanwhile, with the manga and newer anime, Hao's forces go in on the attack. And we actually get to see some of their abilities for the first time. They don't fight like it's a match, they fight to kill, to maim in any way possible. And Ren's all too ready to jump in, and in all versions he cuts through the one member's weapon, seemingly injuring him. And whereas in the original anime it's Ryu versus the one beam user, it's only through that Ryu and Ren realize how much stronger their opponents are getting. Whereas with the manga and newer anime, it continues to be Ren who fights against basically all of them, with Ren actually started to kind of style on them in the same way that Mikihisa did him, easily dodging all of their attacks and knocking them away, with Ren having learned some of Mikihisa's techniques just through battle, with Necrom even noting that this is one of the teachings from Hao, something called Shamanic Oracle, which we had even seen Yo previously use. That was the whole reasoning behind his whole fight against Team Iceman, is we saw him use this technique where he could read Furyoku and know how best to avoid any forms of attacks. This is kind of like riding the wave of mana or Furyoku, as they put it. You couldn't tell it from when Yo was fighting, but now that you're seeing it in practice used by Ren, it's a little bit more clear. And it's also noted by Necrom that everyone in Hao's group can do it, as we see that while they were physically hit, they weren't hit by any kind of Furyoku spiritual attack. And everyone notes that Ren very much was interesting to Hao because of how he managed to take out Peyote, but Peyote sees that as, well, I didn't technically lose. And Peyote only sees it that way because he's still alive. Through continuing to live, they don't have a victory against him. And it is only through killing your foes that you receive true victory. In fact, all of them see it as Ren not killing them in that instance as a sign of weakness. Meanwhile, in the original anime, it's only then that you didn't see Peyote and his new big oversoul, which he got because of his increase in power from Hao. Which seems odd that Hao would only teach them as they're making their way to the Great Spirit. It makes more sense from the perspective of the manga and newer anime that Hao would have already taught them from the jump. Like, here's a way to increase your strength. This is why these characters are so strong. However, it's thanks to the intervention of Horohoro that everyone's able to hold their ground even better than before. But there's still enough of a challenge. We even see big guy Bill. He can't handle the amount of Furyoku and kind of self-destructs in on himself. And even dies in the process. And you see more members of Hao's forces continue to align, and it's revealed that Hao kind of did it kind of on a whim, kind of finding them disposable, which he does in every version. Like, seriously, every bit of continuity, Hao finds everyone disposable. And it's kind of seen as a test of strength. Only the strongest can handle that power, basically. And it starts to become more and more of a desperate struggle as things go on. But more and more of Yo's friends arrive to help out each other. It really does become a little bit of a back and forth for the most part. Then we get this interesting moment between Hao and Manta as to why he feels that his companions won't betray him. We also see the empowerment of Anna's beads in an effort to try to take down Hao, gain as many opportunities as possible. And in the original anime, this is the first appearance of Blocken's Oversoul, which kind of tells you exactly the last little bit of information that the original anime managed to get from the manga, because that is about at volume 21. That's the last little bit of information they could have gotten, and that's Blocken's Oversoul. And as it looks like Horohoro's about to be taken out of the picture, Ren manages to come in and save him, helping out his friend right up into the end, only for him to be sideswiped by Peyote. Meanwhile, in the manga and newer anime, the thing that distracts Ren is the revelation that Nikrom is Chrom's brother, the patch officiant that Ren had killed. And this really sets Ren reeling. And this is one of the few moments I really have to give to the newer anime, because this moment is very reminiscent of what the original anime would have done. Having Ren kind of be confronted by his previous self. It's actually a very fascinating scene, and showing just how much horror Ren has at the way that he used to be, and it leaves Ren wide open to be slain. So Ren, and the way that Peyote manages to basically take him down for the count, I prefer it in the manga and newer anime, because Ren's own guilt being the thing that got him killed, I don't know, there's just something really intense about it. So we end chapter 150, the Shamanic Oracle, and enter into chapter 151, Farewell Forever. And so in all versions, Ren is felled by Peyote's powerful oversoul, the Grand Phantasma. And whereas in the original it's his giant oversoul, in the manga and newer anime, it's a giant mariachi corpse controlled by 5 different spirits. And I gotta say, I love the theatrics of the way that not so much the manga does it, but the way that the newer anime does it, when the introduction of Gran Fantasma is done, with Peyote saying adios eternamente, or farewell forever, and the utter disbelief of Horohoro and Chocolove. And I love the way it plays out in the newer anime, where everything just feels hazy to everyone, except for the bad guys. Like, it's such an absolutely devastating moment, with them trying to rationalize that it's just like an oversoul, it's a teaching from Mikihisa. And I love it. I love the way the new anime does it, where the song in the background starts playing, and the realization of the desperation of the situation sets in, as Ren's blood just flows out, and Nikrom delights in telling them an oversoul doesn't cast shadows. It's really him. Your friend is going to die. His soul is still barely clinging to his body, but soon he will become a ghost, and he will be fed to the spirit of fire. And then boom! Chocolove and Horohoro try to retaliate, not willing to give up, knowing that as long as they managed to get Ren to Faust, they might be able to save him. And I love them just doing their best to attack, but their power just isn't enough, as stated by Necrom. And they just can't stand up to the power of Hao's minions. Meanwhile, in the original, you see Ren bleed out, but the thing about it is, you don't see how he was injured exactly. He just starts bleeding from somewhere. And the episode just ends on Ren lying there in a pool of his own blood. And then you get episode 60, Friends, as everyone goes rushing to Ren, as their enemies try to go in for one final attack. But in every version, it's not over just yet, as in every version, Horohoro makes an ice wall, and in the original anime, Faust is already there to try to treat Ren. But in the manga and newer anime, Horohoro has to make a kind of ice covering to keep Ren from bleeding out, but it's only so much. and they only have so much time to try to protect Ren and get him to Faust, with them realizing the thing that Mickey warned them that they had something up their sleeve was a distraction, something to get inside of Ren's head, and thus our heroes end up in a desperate situation. And so the desperate bid to save Ren is underway. And whereas at least in the original anime you have Chocolove, Horohoro, and Ryu all fighting, with Faust actively there trying to treat Ren, even though they're still outnumbered with 5 of Hao's minions bearing down on them, it's a little bit better than the situation in the manga and newer anime, where Ren is dying, Chocolove and Horohoro are completely outmatched and bared down upon by 3 people who have already shown that they're just too impossibly strong for them to handle. So in all versions, Ren is on death's door, with the potential of his survival slipping through with every passing second. I still prefer the manga, and to a certain degree the newer anime, just because Ren's potential death feels a lot more significant there. Like, Ren's loss was actually a tactical thing there, whereas in the original anime it's just played off of it could happen to anyone. Anyone could have ended up almost potentially dying. The significance of it happening to Ren only comes from the fact that he was actually trying to protect a friend. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about the overwhelming power of the minions of Hao, and how they managed to completely outclass some of Yo's friends? Because for me at this point, the ever-increasing gap of power makes a lot more sense to me in the manga and newer anime rather than in the original anime, where people just increase power almost arbitrarily without any real explanation as to how or why. Whereas with the manga and newer anime, they're actually going into it, being able to ride the wave of Furyoku, how the minions of Hao have always known how to do this because they've studied under Hao, and it's Hao's teachings that is able to unlock newer and greater power for a lot of these characters. I don't know, there's just a little bit more impact here. But until next time, I've been Duuz-Diz-Din. If you like this video, please like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for notifications. And I will see you on the next episode of What's the Difference? Until then, bye-bye.